Hi, magandang gabi. I'm your Tito Goby, and tonight we're gonna react to Utterly Noah's video. Um, how anti-woke culture weaponizes 1980s nostalgia. All right, let's get to it.
So, not too long ago, the Masters of the Universe trailer was released from Amazon MGM Studios, and the
He-Man.
response was
Okay.
interesting to say the least.
A question I get asked a lot is, what's next? They've hit every franchise. They've wokeized everything. They've turned everything into this like slop level joke tier Marvel movie. And then it's like, is there anything else left? And it's, you've seen the meme with the Grim Reaper going through its path of MCU, Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who. Now they've come for Masters of the Universe.
Gee, that's pretty tough talk for the guy who got outed online for stealing a woman's identity to try to sell female smut books under her name because his own AI-generated books weren't selling whatsoever.
Here's the thing. Most of these movies and TV shows from the 80s that they're redoing or remaking are targeted for men, for guys, for boys. We grew up on these. Why can't they redo She-Ra instead? They can do Care Bears. What's that? Short Tails? Pound Puppies, maybe. What else? They can remake Rainbow Bright. Maybe they did already. I don't know. Is there a remake of Rainbow Bright? Rainbow Bright. I think they did remake it. Rainbow Bright. Remake. Oh, okay. They did do a remake of the cartoon, I guess. TV series, theatrical movie to mark the franchise 40th anniversary. Franchise. My bad. Oh man, I am so dyslexic. Okay. I guess they did remake it, but new generation with films, new project. And oh well. Anyway, let's move on. I just want to know why they're not remaking girl stuff back then.
Which, gee, I can't imagine why those weren't selling. Oh, and he also got outed as a wife beater. Shocker. And of course, the usual suspects over on Nerdrotic's side of things were acting exactly the same as you'd probably expect as well.
I think we need a race swapped He-Man. I don't know about you guys. We need an Indian He-Man who says, I have to shower!
Damn, bro, you got the whole squad laughing.
While there are definitely legitimate concerns to have about the upcoming latest installment in the He-Man franchise, probably most notably that this is the latest blockbuster film to star Jared Leto in a major role, who somehow still manages to get roles even after everything he's been accused of, and also now appearing in the Epstein files of all things. Most of the usual suspects are simply upset at this film supposedly being woke propaganda, claiming that the fact that Man-at-Arms is being played by Idris Elba in this film, and also the fact that He-Man has a pronoun nameplate on his desk, means that clearly this film is gonna be woke garbage. Oh no, pronouns, the horror.
Sorry, did you want to get immersed in our world? Yeah, well, guess what? Fucking pronouns!
But I think one of the most interesting aspects of this is that even though the anti-woke crowd appears to be very upset at this movie for betraying the original show and making it all woke now, They seem to have forgotten that the original show was initially berated by conservative audiences at the time for its often very on-the-nose gay undertones. But now, for some reason, it seems like the anti-woke crowd has very conveniently forgotten this and now is attempting to act like it's been quote-unquote wokeified in the year of 2026. Funny how that works. And interestingly enough, this is a larger trend we have seen in recent memory, people on the anti-woke side of things utilizing 80s nostalgia and almost weaponizing it in some cases for their own personal political agenda. For years and years now, we've seen Hollywood mining the 1980s for the best IPs to bring back to life for a nostalgia-hungry audience. We've seen the A-Team come back. We've seen Ghostbusters come back twice. We've seen Blade Runner come back. We saw Indiana Jones come back twice as well, unfortunately. Even just last year alone, we saw The Naked Gun, Tron, The Smurfs, Predator, and The Running Man all come back. So why exactly is Hollywood, and also anti-woke culture, which we'll get into, so obsessed with the 1980s?
So what should I expect?
Think 80s?
I like the 80s.
Now, Hollywood has always been about bringing back nostalgic properties for a really long time now, make no mistake. But for some reason, they seem very distinctly obsessed with the 1980s. If we look at the amount of 90s IPs that have been brought back by Hollywood, or even just 2000s, it's actually a far smaller list than the 1980s. Even now, as Gen X, the audience the easiest to cater to with bringing back 1980s IPs, enters their 50s, Hollywood still continues to mine the 1980s for even the smallest of films to bring back. And inevitably, it's not just Hollywood that seems very specifically interested in the 1980s, modern-day American politics also do. Take a look at Donald Trump's own presidential campaign, which, funny enough, was modeled directly after Ronald Reagan's own original campaign from the 1980s, even down to the original campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again." Almost as if they're trying to claim that American culture was at its peak in the 1980s, which isn't entirely true, but more on that later. But why exactly is the 1980s such a vast well so many people want to draw from, whether it's anti-woke grifters wanting to sell a narrative or politicians wanting...
It's not a narrative. It's just you're ruining our childhood. I don't know what's up with Noah over here, but I guess he never lived, or he wasn't born in the 80s or 90s, so he would know.
to win an election? Well, that's the question I want to answer today. I want to look exactly at why the 1980s seems to be a decade held in such reverence by people and why it's often very intentionally weaponized by people on the anti-woke side of things. The 1980s is treated almost as this beacon of hope, a sacred decade that anything pulled from is automatically going to be treated with this almost...
I'll say it again, it's our childhood. You are ruining our childhood. It's sacred because we grew up on it. Oh God, man, come on.
mystical reverence, no matter how niche or inconsequential what's being pulled from actually is. To get a better understanding of this, we first need to look at the exact kinds of films that were being made in the 1980s, which actually means we have to look at what happened to Hollywood in the previous decade. In the 1970s, the film industry experienced something of a revolution. This was the era that the traditional studio system of Hollywood completely collapsed, largely due to the major studios losing direct control of theaters across America, since initially various theaters were controlled by film studios before an antitrust law passed in 1947 resulted in studios simply acting as distributors for a variety of films to be shown in theaters, and theaters themselves no longer being owned directly by studios. As a result, many studios were in dire financial straits, with Paramount getting acquired by Gulf and Western, a giant media conglomerate, in order to act as a giant advertising firm for them and create various ad campaigns, which were meant to directly endorse the company. What do you know, not too far off from how Paramount is now after the Skydance merger. But perhaps the main good thing to come out of the collapse of the original Hollywood studio system was the fact that now an entirely new generation of directors were brought on by a variety of studios, without having to commit to one particular studio and follow their often heavily filtered, very censored process of filmmaking. Finally, directors and filmmakers were allowed to truly express themselves and make films they never could have made before under the old system, and the studios couldn't really afford to turn down any of these new up-and-coming directors, since that would mean losing capital even further. As a result, this was the decade that some of the most renowned American directors of the past 50 years, people like Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, and others all rose to prominence since they were more or less given unlimited creative freedom, and the ability to speak to a younger, more restless group of people who had become some of their most devoted audiences. Films like Apocalypse Now, Network, A Clockwork Orange, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, The Deer Hunter, the original Muppet movie, Jaws, The Godfather, Grease, Alien, Gone in 60 Seconds. The original one, not the Nicolas Cage movie made later at Disney, which is by far the worst version. Taxi Driver, and probably most famous of all. These were all films that came out in the 1970s as a result, an era highlighted by creative freedom and a lack of overly tight control from a Hollywood studio system. Also, this decade had Disney's Robin Hood, which was one of the key cornerstones of the founding of the furry fandom, so obviously it was very important.
Like I said, it's not just that for the furries, I guess. I did mention a few of them already. Pound puppies, short tails, the Care Bears. There was a whole lot of cartoons that's like this.
Important for that too. Maid Miriam and Robin Hood are like the mother and father of the furry fandom. There really wasn't a decade quite like the 1970s in terms of film, just simply because of the circumstances surrounding it, and arguably there might never be one quite like it again, exactly because of that. However, when it came to the 1980s, which of course is the decade that most anti-woke grifters seem to be constantly calling back to,
Why they keep on calling them grifters, but okay. Hey, whatever.
the film landscape began to change drastically and a new kind of studio system began to gradually take shape. Rather than purely director-driven, unconventional movies marketed towards the counterculture being the norm and the most profitable films of the decade, we began to see the tide turn drastically in the 1980s. I think a perfect example of the audience's tastes in films drastically shifting in the 1980s is looking at none other than the year of 1982. This year had 4 major experimental films, 3 of which were sci-fi: Disney and Steven Spielberg's Tron, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, and John Carpenter's The Thing. All very unique and distinctive experimental takes on the sci-fi genre. The other big experimental film from this year was The King of Comedy, which is the latest feature from none other than Martin Scorsese, one of the stars of the countercultural film movement who had risen up in the previous decade, of course. However, unlike Scorsese's previous films, this was his first certifiable commercial failure, which in the 1970s would have been unheard of, given that he was one of the main faces changing the landscape of cinema. This was a worrying sign of big changes coming to Hollywood, and in addition to this, all the previous experimental sci-fi films I mentioned before, Tron, Blade Runner, and The Thing, also all flopped. Of course, all 3 of these films would later go on to become big cult classics and also certifiable touchstones of the sci-fi genre in their own right, but at the time of their release, they weren't exactly commercially successful. The big runaway success of 1982, which would cement the kinds of films Hollywood would be pushing this decade, was none other than E.T. the Extraterrestrial. This film was not a complex feature made with a counterculture in mind, and also was not a film designed with the distinct intent of getting its audience to relate the events of the film to current ongoing political struggle, unlike most of the films of the 1970s. Even Star Wars itself was doing this back in the 1970s, given the fact George Lucas intentionally designed Star Wars as an allegory for his perspective on the Vietnam War. The Empire was created to represent America at the time, and the Rebels were designed to represent Viet Cong.
You did something very interesting with Star Wars, if you think about it. The good guys are the rebels. They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. I think we call those guys terrorists today. We call them Mujahideen, we call them Al-Qaeda.
When I did it, they were Viet Cong.
Exactly. So were you thinking of that at the time?
E.T., however, seemed to strip itself of this entirely, not wanting to tie itself to any ongoing political or cultural movements. Instead, this film was a very simple, very marketable film, the concept of which could be summed up in a single sentence. It was a simple love story between an alien and a boy, with the titular alien trying to phone his way home. And this
Love story. Love story. What's wrong with you? It's not a love story.
is exactly the kind of film that would pervade Hollywood for the foreseeable future. Gone were the days of the gritty, complex counterculture film, and in was the highly marketed blockbuster event that could be marketed to the biggest audience possible and highly merchandised as well. Of course, that's not a knock against 1980s films, quite the opposite in fact. This decade provided so many timeless American films such as Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Goonies, Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Gremlins, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and plenty more. But there was a noticeable shift in the types of films Hollywood really began to push forward in this decade, as opposed to the 1970s. As the longtime Hollywood producer Don Simpson, who produced such highly marketable action films such as Top Gun for Paramount and The Rock for Disney, put it, these were high-concept films, as in films that could be summed up in a single sentence and distributed to the widest audience possible. And in an interesting sort of way, the extreme push for only these kinds of films to be pushed forward by Hollywood actually ended up being a perfect representation of the kind of mentality that was overtaking the 1980s overall that hadn't existed in the decades prior. The 1960s and 1970s were the decades where the civil rights movement really took hold, with many different minorities coming forward and taking a stand for better rights. Most notable amongst these were African Americans who sought out better rights through the Black Power movement of the late 1960s. Following the assassination of the truly compassionate activist and lead figure of the civil rights movement, that being Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, civil unrest broke out, and many were unsure of what the future of equal rights for minorities would look like. So a number of young artists and filmmakers took to expressing their thoughts on everything going on in the nation at the time through the only medium they knew how to express themselves through, that being the medium of film. Films like Taxi Driver, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Star Wars were all direct results of that, and of course those were all films released in the 1970s. But by the 1980s, some certain groups of people were getting pretty uncomfortable seeing the exact kinds of injustices that in many ways were being directly caused by them being portrayed so blatantly and so casually in Hollywood, to a broad audience of young people and old people alike. As a result, this group, mostly made up of right-wingers and people that today would likely be considered anti-woke, longed for the days before the civil rights movement, when injustices weren't publicized.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. Maybe for a few or some of these YouTubers and VTubers, but I doubt that is true. This, oh man.
And they could get away with mistreating minorities with no repercussions whatsoever.
These guys aren't mistreating anybody. Oh man.
Was a mentality felt by conservative audiences in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and funny enough, a certain presidential campaign was about to directly market off of this audience's seemingly nostalgic memories of times from the past, when civil rights weren't publicized. And that presidential campaign was none other than that of Ronald Reagan. For those unaware, although if you're watching this video based on the thumbnail, you probably are aware, but Ronald Reagan was the 40th President of the United States and widely renowned for his conservative policies. Ronald Reagan is a very interesting case because seeing the conservative audience that was around at the time and seemingly pining for the days before the civil rights movement and before injustices against minorities were made much more public, and before they had to deal with scrutiny for singling people out or isolating people of color with a rhetoric not too unlike a certain group that also just happens to exist today. Gee, funny how that works. Reagan realized exactly what he could do to easily and very succinctly appeal to this ideology in order to secure his place in office. He decided to model his entire presidential campaign after feeding into nostalgia for the 1950s, aka the decade just before the civil rights movement. And he decided to cap this campaign off with the slogan, "Make America Great Again." Gee, I wonder where I've heard that one before.
The weak will be purged.
Ideology in order to secure his place in office. He decided to model his entire presidential campaign after feeding into nostalgia for the 1950s, aka the decade just before the civil rights movement. And he decided to cap this campaign off with the slogan, "Make America..."
That's for reals. His slogan was "Make America Great." check this out. Ronald Reagan. Original slogan. Ronald Reagan original signature campaign slogan for his successful 1980s presidential bid was "Let's make America great again." Really? I thought it was "Let's make America great." Is this true? Bush in 80s. Hmm. I guess it is. There, I guess that is. There you go. There's the original poster. Let's make America great again.
Great again. Huh, gee, I wonder where I've heard that one before.
The weak will be purged, and the strongest will thrive, free to live as they see fit. They'll make America great again!
What the hell are you talking about?
More on that later, of course. With this campaign, Reagan pretty easily earned the trust instantly of conservative voters who were convinced he was gonna bring things back to when America was great again. Like when minorities didn't have the rights that they had in the 1980s, huh?
We had rights? What do you mean? I you gotta live in the 80s to actually say that. Because we we were able to like walk around the US without any hassle. What do you mean?
What do you know? It should also be noted that in 2019, a previously concealed phone
Okay, racism existed, yes, but still, it wasn't so racist that it was whites only kind of situation. We were able to go to, from different states. We were able to visit other states, and nobody was giving us any crap. So what the fuck do you mean, kid?
call of Ronald Reagan calling black people monkeys when discussing them was leaked, which was already pretty telling of his exact mentality when enacting this campaign in many of his policies throughout his presidency.
On the heels of President Trump using disparaging imagery to describe African nations, new tapes have just been released by the National Archives that reveal similar language used by the late President Ronald Reagan. Reagan referred to leaders of African nations as, quote, monkeys, and then President Nixon gets in his own dig. Here you go.
And last night, I tell you, to watch that thing on television, as I did, to see those monkeys from those African countries, damn them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes.
Well, and then the tail wags the dog there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The tail wags the dog.
He also initially opposed there being a Martin Luther King Jr. Day since he didn't feel like a black activist being celebrated was beneficial to his particular vision of making America great again. As detailed,
It has been pointed out that to me that Reagan opposed making Martin Luther King Day a national holiday, giving in only when Congress passes a law creating the holiday by a veto-proof majority. But he really didn't mean to disrespect the civil rights movement in the past, just And this is a link, of course. Okay.
Detailed in this 2007 article that discussed many
2007 article. New York Times. There you go, November 10, 2007.
of Ronald Reagan's quote-unquote innocent mistakes. I will be linking this article down below my sources list if you'd like to see the full thing, but it's pretty telling and also very enlightening just how many times Reagan did this sort of thing in general. There was the time he claimed the Voting Rights Act, which had finally granted African Americans the right to vote, was something that had been quote-unquote humiliating the South. Of course, referring to white Southerners. And also, there was the time when Reagan supported Bob Jones University, which was about to lose its tax-exempt status due to holding onto its ban on interracial marriage. And also the time he fired 3 different members of the Civil Rights Commission from his administration. Yeah, clearly these were all just happy accidents, nothing racially biased whatsoever. Reagan admittedly knew exactly what he was doing with this, and his campaign also intentionally utilized nostalgia for the 1950s in order to secure the confidence of a conservative audience in the 1980s. This ended up securing his spot in office and also creating a slight push against civil rights movements and minorities. While this, of course, wasn't enough to quell the movement entirely, history would repeat itself inevitably about 30 years later in 2015, when something suspiciously similar happened in relation to a certain presidential election as well. Yes, of course, none other than Donald Trump intentionally copied the exact kinds of methods that had worked so well for Reagan's campaign in the 1980s, catering to a conservative audience's nostalgic feelings for a specific time period and also utilizing it to not only win the election, but also very intentionally undermine minorities and attempt to segregate them further. Huh, gee, funny how that happened twice. However, instead of utilizing nostalgia for the 1950s, Trump utilized nostalgia for the 1980s for his particular election, which, in a lot of ways, proved to be even more dangerous of a tool than 1950s nostalgia. While the Make America Great Again slogan technically started with Reagan, Trump was the one who truly embodied it and took it to the extreme. Especially due to all the memorable media produced during the 1980s, that being all the high-concept films produced during the rejuvenation of Hollywood's studio system, it made it even easier for Trump to sell this type of ideology to people than it was for Reagan for the 1950s. And even outside of Trump, this is a tactic many anti-woke grifters use as well. People like Critical Drinker, Nerdrotic, Heel vs. Babyface, Metatron, John Della Rose, Disparu, That Star Wars Girl, Snarky J, and plenty more all do tend to intentionally reference the 19...
Okay. Let's see, when did they make the remix first? Okay. Let's start with Ghostbusters. (2016). All female cast. When did Trump come into office? Okay. Okay, so Donald Trump came to office in 2017, his first term, to January 2021. All right. Remember, at 2017, that's when Donald Trump started. Okay, and I didn't vote for Trump neither. I don't like his policies, but just this anti-woke or whatever stuff that Noah was talking about movies. All right. So the Ghostbusters remake, the all-female one, was in 2016. So a year before Trump came into office. Okay. Another remake. What else did they remake that flopped? I think that's the first one, right? 80s remake. IMDb. RoboCop 2014. Okay. Endless Love 2014. About Last Night 2014. The A-Team 2010. Is doing 21 Jump Street 2012. Karate Kid remake 2010. So a lot of these remakes, the one that flops, was before Donald Trump's election. So it shouldn't even connect because it's the same old slop from before Trump was even elected. I don't know about, come on.
1980s as an era that totally wasn't woke and is an era where clearly everybody knew better, and we should go back to that.
Are you fucking dumb?
It is interesting because they also often do try to act like media from the 1880s wasn't woke by the standards they often presented their videos. A good example of this is critical.
No, it becomes woke when you change the sex of the main characters. Like Ghostbusters, the all-women cast. That's when it becomes woke. Oh God, man.
Drinker discussing the TV series Alien Earth and trying to act like it's woke propaganda. And also trying to act like the original Alien movie totally wasn't woke at all by the standards he presents here. It should also be noted that according to this article, Critical Drinker is the same guy who found himself in court at one point for the accusation of assaulting an 11-year-old boy. He was apparently found not guilty, but only because the Crown didn't want to proceed with a conviction, also according to this article, so take that as you will. Let's see what he had to say.
Wow, I've been on quite the roller coaster ride with Alien Earth. The first episode seemed to confirm my hopes. There was action and spectacle, gorgeous visuals and production design, a talented cast, gory body horror, sinister corporate conspiracies, grizzled looking crewmen sitting around smoky briefing rooms, and a thoughtful exploration of a facet of the alien universe that often gets neglected.
So right off the bat, I love that Drinker wasn't actually able to explain what specific facet of the alien universe he thinks gets neglected here, and he was glad got addressed in Alien Earth. This is an incredibly vague statement and could quite literally mean anything. But of course, Drinker, being the grizzly bear that he is, doesn't actually want to give a specific analysis of Alien Earth whatsoever. He's obviously not interested in actually getting into the nitty-gritty of what worked about the show and what didn't work for him whatsoever. The only reason he made this video to begin with is to farm outrage by creating incredibly shallow, lackluster commentary surrounding this show without actually diving into the show and its themes or anything about it whatsoever. In other words, this is not a real review, which, knowing Drinker, is absolutely a given.
Holy shit, maybe this show was actually going to be decent. I even said as much on Twitter while ranting about some journalist who sees literally all of entertainment as a gender identity seminar.
Ah yes, because it totally makes sense to bring up some random argument you had on Twitter when trying to review Alien Earth. Maybe talk about the show and don't talk about random interactions you have on Twitter. It's kinda not really helping you look like a real reviewer here whatsoever.
Anyway, Marcy's put through an experimental procedure to transfer her consciousness into a new android body as part of a larger project to extend human lifespan. Pretty soon she's joined by a gang of other kids who all went through the same process, and because I guess the writers are fans of Peter Pan, she becomes Wendy and the others take on the names of the Lost Boys. You know, I'm not entirely sure the writers understand the themes of Peter Pan. I mean, I get that it's all cool and artistic to juxtapose a classic piece of children's fairy tale literature against the existential cosmic horror of the xenomorphs, because it's like a sharp contrast and stuff. But I can't shake the feeling that they're trying to fit a thematic square peg into a round hole with this one. Peter Pan was a story about the childish fear of growing up, of taking on the responsibilities and burdens of adulthood, of getting physically older and inevitably facing up to their own mortality. This is a story about children literally placed into adult bodies that will never age, forced to grow up quickly and adapt to their new situation.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point, Drinker. Inevitably, what Drinker doesn't understand here is the reason why the Peter Pan terminology is being used in this show is because the story of Wendy and her cohorts in a lot of ways is like a reverse Peter Pan. Instead of being kids who are whisked away to Neverland and never want to grow up, they are kids who are placed into adult bodies and want to grow up too fast. That's literally the whole point of Wendy and her crew's story, but unfortunately Drinker didn't quite realize that.
All seems to be going well for Wendy until news of the ship crash reaches them and she sees footage of her brother Joe going in with the rescue teams. She wants to help him out, so she petitions her superiors to be sent in with the Lost Boys as a rescue team, and for some reason, they actually agree to it.
In the quiet words of the Virgin Mary, come again.
Like, you understand that you're basically sending children into a highly dangerous and highly traumatic situation with no weapons or training, right? Aside from the fact that they could easily get destroyed and wipe out billions of dollars of investment, how do you think they're gonna react when they see dead bodies and horribly injured victims? Shit like that can cause veteran soldiers to freak out, never mind kids that have never seen anything more violent than an episode of SpongeBob.
So, funny enough, if Drinker had actually paid attention to the show, he would have realized that this was actually already addressed in the first episode. Wendy realizes her brother is out there amongst the shipwreck with only a few other crewmates, so she volunteers to go with the Lost Boys to go aid him. Initially, this young Elon Musk stand-in who created Wendy in the show is initially skeptical of her and the Lost Boys going over there, but of course, being the very cocky person he is, he decides to go along with it and see if his toys that he's created can stand up to this test. The other smarter, more mature people here on his board object to it, as you can see in this clip here, but he decides to go with it anyway.
I said we can do it. Sir, we're fast, we're strong, we don't break.
Send them.
Send?
Yeah. The Lost Boys. Let's see how they handle the stress. I want all technicians on deck. Monitor brain function, emotional response, see how the enhanced physiognomy performs.
Sir, they're not first responders. They're still in the prototype stage. The loss of a single unit would be devastating.
Yeah, so don't lose one.
If Drinker had actually paid attention to the show, he might be able to store this kind of information in that giant forehead of his, but clearly he actually wasn't watching the show whatsoever.
Also, the idea of having children in adult bodies facing off against aliens might have sounded good in a brainstorming session where everyone was high on coke, but the reality is the Lost Boys are annoying as fuck, completely idiotic, and there's far too many of them to do any real character development. The first two Alien movies were compelling because for the most part the humans were smart and logical and made the best decisions they could under the circumstances. You rooted for them because you understood them and you identified with them. I don't care about any of the Lost Boys because 1, they can't feel pain or injuries, 2, they can't be impregnated by facehuggers, and 3, well, they're fucking idiots.
So inevitably, Drinker's reasoning for quote-unquote not being able to like the Lost Boys in this series makes no real sense whatsoever. The reasons he gives here is that they can't feel pain and they can't be impregnated by facehuggers. So what exactly is your criteria for caring about a character then? Is it only to
No, his point is that the fear for the aliens is lost. There's no actual mortality. They're like superhumans versus the aliens. It's not regular people versus something like really, really scary. So that's where it kind of lost a lot of us. But of course, to each their own, so oh well.
See them get completely demolished on screen? Is it to see them in extreme pain or get impregnated by an alien?
Yes. That's what it was. That's one of what we wanted to see.
The reasons he gives here is that they can't feel pain and they can't be impregnated by face huggers. So what exactly is your criteria for caring about a character then? Is it only to see them get completely demolished on screen? Is it to see them in extreme pain or get impregnated by an alien? This logic makes absolutely no sense and really isn't any
That logic's entertainment. It's for a thrill, you know. I guess you haven't seen any of those slasher movies, Friday the 13th and all that. But you probably know the characters, but you probably haven't seen the movies. Yeah, it's supposed to keep you on edge. You know what's gonna happen. Like, oh my God, that actually happened. But.
kind of actual character criticism whatsoever. Drinker seems to somehow think because he can't see these characters in physical pain or getting impregnated by aliens, he somehow can't care about them at all.
Yes, it's an Aliens franchise. That's the target audience. The people who grew up watching Aliens and playing the video games and reading comic books on them and everything.
And his last point there about the characters being supposedly dumb also shows once again he clearly wasn't actually paying attention to the story in this show. These were all dying children who were put into the bodies of robotic adults. They are quite literally the minds of kids put into the bodies of grown-ups, so it kind of makes sense they wouldn't always make the right decisions. They're still growing into their own bodies even. Overall, while Drinker very clearly tried to compare Alien Earth to Alien and Aliens here and claim it's all woke now and that makes it bad, that really isn't what happened here at all, and he failed to give any substantial criticism as well. It's also very funny because if the original Alien film came out today, by the standards a lot of these grifters often give, yes, it would be considered woke by them. It features a tough-as-nails female protagonist who isn't sexualized whatsoever and outlives everybody else around her by the end of the film, including the male characters around her. By the logic a lot of these guys often give, this film would absolutely be considered woke today. But believe it or not, it's not even just Critical Drinker who has done this method before of weaponizing 80s nostalgia in order to pander towards an anti-woke audience. Someone like Ranting for Vengeance has also done this before when he was complaining about Marvel's Fantastic Four and also Superman coming out last year and saying that 80s anime was way better and totally not woke. Oh boy. Let's see what our favorite emo version of a Raggedy Ann doll had to say.
So, do you ever find yourself sick and tired of the Fantastic Four and whatever new crap DC is putting out like Superman? Well, there is a solution. You could go back and read the old comics, or there's something that might even be better: anime and manga. Now, before you laugh, I'm not talking about your bullshit manga and anime that everybody loves, like Attack on Titan and My Hero Academia and Jujutsu Kaisen. That's a load of trash. I'm going to be telling you about the real anime and manga that is superior to anything the West has ever put out. I'm just kind of sick of Fantastic Four and Superman. I don't know about you, it might be funny to rag on it for a bit, but it's not just going to be my entire life attacking Fantastic Four.
I love how he says this when, if you look at his page, the next two videos he made after making this manga one were exactly that, him bashing Fantastic Four for being woke propaganda. Way to hypocrite, Goob from Meet the Robinsons.
There's going to be a few anime and manga that you should check out if you're sick of American comics and American movies and TV shows. So the ones I'm going to be talking about today are ones that will be available or are available now, and are ones that not many people have ever talked about. So after some research and the suggestions from the comments, I've figured out some like Berserk.
Okay, so admittedly this is low-hanging fruit, but calling Berserk an unknown manga is absolutely wild. Berserk is like one of the foundational manga and anime that everybody talks about.
They talk about it now thanks to social media, but before X and Twitter and all the other ones, including YouTube, before that, let's say 2005, maybe 2000 and around the early 2000s. Not a lot of people did know about it. No, thanks to social media, uh, it just blew up, you know. Being a otaku or a anime fan or a weeb or something like that before, it was just like a niche, but now it's mainstream. So
How could you have not heard of this one before? I feel like that's like saying you haven't heard of Gundam or Akira. It's one of those major pieces of Japanese anime or manga that everybody knows about. And it
definitely not everybody. Not everybody still, because even though it's mainstream, there's a lot of people who still doesn't watch or like anime, or they only watch or read certain I guess genres in the anime universe.
It's easily one of the most influential as well. Stuff like Dark Souls or Dragon's Dogma or Soul Calibur or Final Fantasy VII and Devil May Cry even were all influenced by Berserk. Heck, even other manga and anime like Chainsaw Man or Attack on Titan were inspired by Berserk. So obviously there is the possibility that Ranting for Vengeance hadn't somehow heard of Berserk before, but the thing is, everybody else knows about it. That's not an unknown manga. Him trying to label Berserk as an unknown manga is just honestly super disingenuous.
Even though it's known now, what has this have to do with it?
Didn't expect it to be as good as it was, but the thing is really badass and better than almost every American comic out there. Screw the Killing Joke, screw Green Arrow, Green Lantern, screw most DC comics, which are woke garbage, by the way, and I'm not saying that Marvel doesn't do that either, because they do, and it's insufferable.
So this is the part I find the funniest of all. Not only does Ranting for Vengeance think that Berserk is a unknown manga, but he also thinks that it's not quote-unquote woke. The thing is, there actually are a number of LGBT characters in Berserk, which if Ranting for Vengeance actually read the manga, he would know this. And this is something he'd probably dismiss as quote-unquote woke propaganda as well. There are two explicitly stated homosexual characters in Berserk, the first being Donovan and the second being Genin. And even outside of that, there's pretty notable gay subtext between Griffith and Guts. This has always been a thing since the manga has been running, but apparently Ranting for Vengeance just
Between those two, you might be reading some dojin or something like that, but
didn't see that. It's funny that he calls all American comics quote-unquote woke propaganda and tries to recommend you Japanese comics instead, but the Japanese comics he's given you still are quote-unquote woke by his criteria. The jokes really write themselves here. But don't worry everybody, the fun doesn't stop here. Goth Kid from South Park has another pretty telling recommendation for manga here for us.
This one is a bit more common and many people know about it, but kind of brush it off as a comedy, which it is most certainly not. I'm talking about the hard-boiled noir manga that beats Marvel and DC any day, which is City Hunter. Now I'm recommending the manga, which will soon be in print in a massive omnibus, but also I'm recommending the badass anime. Now I might piss some people off here, but have you ever watched Cowboy Bebop? And you thought that the main guy was cool. Oh, he's this badass who's kind of like a bounty hunter, private detective in space. This guy is just going around blowing people away and he's this wisecracking noir character. Yeah, well, he was ripped off directly from 70s Japanese noir movies and this manga right here. So it follows Ryo Saiba, known as the City Hunter, who works as a sweeper, which is basically a private investigator, mercenary assassin in the streets of Tokyo. Now, if you're not sold already, then I don't don't know what's wrong with you, but basically the manga and the anime take from American 80s action movies, they take from Miami Vice, 40s noir, hard-boiled pulp novels, meshing together to create something that is truly one of the best things I've come across. The best part is, in new manga and anime, the protagonists cry and are wimps, but this guy is just an absolute Chad who's always holding a beautiful babe and blown away an evil scumbag with his 357 Magnum. And that's a common trend you'll see with a lot of these good manga and anime, is the fact that the main dudes are not wimps like Deku or Eren Yeager, but are instead more manly than America ever was.
Okay, I find this really funny because he seems to think that City Hunter embraces toxic masculinity, when in actuality, if you read it, that's not really what happens in that manga at all. The main character of City Hunter, Rio, is a pervert who often does try to get with different women, but usually he doesn't and is punished because the manga does recognize this is wrong. There are many times in this manga where Rio actually does come off as a selfish character and embraces toxic masculinity, but he's actually punished for that. And interestingly enough, it's the times when he doesn't act like this that he actually does get the girl, or people actually want to be around him because he's not being a selfish jerk. Kylo Ren here seems to think that City Hunter is celebrating toxic masculinity when, if he actually read it, he would see that it doesn't. And I also find it especially interesting when you look at what he said about the French comic Black Sad in the past, as opposed to what he says about City Hunter.
Yeah, this comic might be taking inspiration from some French stuff, but to be honest with you, every time somebody says that to me, I just get annoyed. You're telling me to go read some French comic that has like 2 pages, because I don't like French comics. Stuff like Black Sad sucks.
You are a sad, strange little man, and you have my pity.
Huh, funny, because that's exactly what Black Sad is too. The comic you just said sucks. Funny enough, both Black Sad and City Hunter are about toxic masculinity tropes and breaking them down, albeit in different ways. John Blacksad isn't quite as much of a womanizer as Rio from City Hunter is, but he still definitely very much is that, and that is part of his character. But, funny enough, just like Rio, this is something he's punished for. This isn't something that's really celebrated as much as deconstructed here. I don't know how Ranting Revengeance managed to walk away from reading both Blacksad and City Hunter and seem to completely misunderstand what both of them are about. It's completely mind-blowing. Ultimately, overall, a lot of these anti-woke grifters, and even just anti-woke politicians in general, often do weaponize 80s nostalgia for their own purposes. Nostalgia is a very powerful tool and can be a very powerful weapon when used by these kinds of people. But fortunately, me doing these kinds of videos that I do here has helped a lot more people become privy to this grift overall and understand when it is occurring. People like Clownfish TV, Jesterbell, Geeks and Gamers, Metatron, and plenty of others have seen diminishing viewership as people catch on to their grift thanks to the videos I do here, and plenty of others do as well. And someone like Melanie Mack has just straight up left the platform, never to return again. So fortunately, it looks like me educating folks is really paying off, which makes me very happy. So thanks everybody, I'm happy to keep hunting griftly bears. I'm also looking forward to putting out more film ranking videos this year, and also more autism related ones as well, since obviously those are two things that are very passionate for me overall. And I'm also looking forward to doing a few gaming retrospectives this year, so stay tuned for that. But what do you think? Am I wrong? Am I a gay woke furry? Let me know.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, I guess. Toxic masculinity. That's one thing. It's toxic if you're just like a complete douche, right? But masculinity isn't a bad thing, right? But woke people makes it a bad thing. Woke people makes being a man a bad thing. Woke people makes liking guy stuff a bad thing. So I don't know, man. It's like there's anyhow, this video, the 80s nostalgia to me is it's completely different from what utterly Noah is talking about, connecting it to what, red pill stuff, or the what you call it, the right. To me, when you change a lot of these stories, these characters, that ruins the nostalgia. That ruins my childhood for me. That's why it feels woke, especially Ghostbusters when they changed this the Ghostbusters to all girl cast. Oh man. The He-Man one, I don't know. I don't know what's woke about it because I haven't seen it. So we'll see. Um, Marvel did a good. Well, Disney did a pretty good job doing the Marvel universe until it became the MCU, because it's all about women empowerment now, and it doesn't appeal to guys like me anymore. Star Wars was okay. Um, then they did the last three movies until that didn't really set on me too well. Um, but then when they did bring in the Mandalorian, it was doing okay for the, I guess, for the first two season, and then the third season it kind of like just like he, the bounty hunter became a daddy. So it's like there's, I don't know, this just being too political, but yeah, it's not about being anti woke with nostalgia. It's just about ruining our childhood. Sorry, author, but yeah, I have to disagree with you. But all right, that's it for tonight. All right, I'll see you. Goodbye.